Howdy, howdy, everyone. Chris here, and welcome to Garage Noise. This episode, we're going to repair this rusty cab corner. This is a common problem that happens on trucks, and we're going to share with you the process and steps to fix this and make it a high-quality repair that's going to last you for years and years to come. So if you want to change your rusty cab corner from this to this, follow along and see how it's done. What I want to do is create a patch panel that goes from here right down to here. We're going to cut a piece of metal, and then I'm going to shape it first. We'll lay it up on here, and then we'll trace around it, cut the rusted metal out, treat it, and go from there. So let's get started. The first thing I want to determine is how much of this rusty metal we need to remove. It looks really bad, but actually a lot of the metal around it is pretty solid. So I'm using my hammer here just to tap around and see what is solid and what is soft and needs to be replaced. Now I'm going to blow out that rock or remove the rust dust, and then we'll take our angle grinder with a 36 grit roll-lock disc and grind away all the rusted metal, kind of look for the good metal, and figure out where we want to make our cuts. Now I've determined what size patch I need, so I'm going to cut a piece of metal here. This is just some non-galvanized 16 gauge steel. We're going to cut a little piece out, and then we'll shape it to that cab corner. Now I'm just kind of shaping this metal to the cab corner, trying to get an idea of how large I want this patch to be and where I need to make my cuts. There is a vertical line in this cab corner, so we will need to make some bends and some relief cuts so we can get that to wrap around that cab corner. So what I did is I just made a few relief cuts in this patch, and then I'm going to take a pair of pliers and I'm going to bend it where that vertical body line is so it'll wrap around that cab corner nicely. And we'll have to make some more adjustments before we start welding it in. So I want to really shape this patch panel before I do my cuts and remove my rust. I want to know exactly where this is going to lay. I want it to be nice and smooth and to lay flat against the panel. I don't want it to go too deep into that cab corner behind the bedside because I want to be able to access it to weld and do body repair there. Now that I have the patch bent and shaped the way I want, I'm going to go ahead and lay it up here exactly where I want to do the welding and make my cuts. And then I'm going to trace around it with just a Sharpie and mark it all off. And now I know exactly where to make my cuts. I'm going to cut on the inside edge of this Sharpie line, and that patch will fit nice and tight. Now we'll use our Astro cutoff wheel and we'll just cut this metal. Then we can remove it and take a good look inside, see what we've got in there and how bad it really is. So check it out. We have that rusted metal cut away, and check out inside this rocker. It's really rusty. It's really pitted that metal and just done some damage. So we need to clean all this up. It's not a problem. The first thing we're going to do is blow out all that loose rust, and then I'm going to grind it with my belt sander and a 36 grit sandpaper, and we're just going to grind away as much of that rust as possible. There are going to be some pitted areas we can't get to with the grinder, so we're going to sandblast those areas. But this tool is really handy in situations like this. You can get in there and get all that rust ground down and removed, and then we can blow this all out and start sandblasting. Okay, so now it's time to sandblast all that pitted metal. So I've got my sandblaster. This is just an inexpensive sandblaster. You put a hose in a sandbag, and then you can go to town. So this is going to help remove a lot of that pitted metal. Now, it is a little bit difficult. I can't get everywhere and every angle, but I'm just going in different angles trying to remove as much of that as possible. I'm not a big fan of sandblasting. It creates a mess, but you know what? It's the best thing in this situation. And you absolutely want to do everything you possibly can to keep that rust from coming back, because you don't want to do this again. You don't want to have another problem down the road. So this is the most important part right here, is getting rid of all that rust, and then we're going to convert it as well. Before we take the next step, we got to remove all that sand. We got to blow it out really, really extremely well and make sure all of that is removed. So if we take a good look inside this rocker after the sandblasting, you can see how the sandblasting gets in those pits and removes that rust. There is some more rust here I'm going to take care of, and we'll continue sandblasting, get all that removed as much as possible before we use the rust converter. Now I'm just going to mask this off quickly so we don't have any overspray from the primers or the products that we're using to treat this rust. This is the rust converter I'm using today. It's made by Duplicolor, and basically it creates a chemical reaction with the rust and makes a black substance that can be painted over. I don't know, it's science, but it works, and this is what you got to do to treat the rust. So we're going to spray it in there really well, make sure every area is covered that we can get. So I'm spraying it up, down the rocker, wherever I can to get this protected. So after I let the rust converter dry, the next step I'm going to use is, this is a weld through primer. I'm just going to spray everything in there with the weld through primer. I've got to use the weld through primer anyway, and that'll just be added protection before we weld the patch panel in. And we're going to do one more step before the weld through. Actually, two more. I'm going to use this E-coat and then fluid film to protect it. So the E-coat is basically just an OEM primer. So that'll be another good layer of protection over this rusted metal. I'm letting everything dry in between. So I'm going to do my E-coat, and then I let that dry, and then I'm going to go through and put the fluid film over top of that. And the fluid film is the last resort. That is an oil-based product that lubricates everything in there, so water can't penetrate the primers and the sealers and everything we're coating this with. Here's a good look at inside that rocker after the E-coat, and as you can see, it's all covered really well. I loaded it up so we got a few layers of protection there. Now we'll do the last layer of protection, which is this fluid film, and with this extension straw I can really spray it down in all the cracks and crevices and down the rocker as far as I can and up inside this cab corner. This stuff is going to give it a good layer of protection against moisture. Now I've got the patch piece fitting up the way I want it. I'm going to weld up those relief cuts, and then we're going to coat it with weld through primer, the back side and the front side, and then we're going to start tack welding it on. Now when I tack weld it on, what I'm doing is I'm making sure the metal lines up. We're butt welding this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tack one spot, go around the patch, tack here and there. I don't want to have the metal heat up. So I have my air blower with me, and as I weld, I'm going to cool it so we don't warp any metal around it. We don't want to weld one solid bead. We want to tack weld it in different places and then just keep filling that in. The welder I'm using is the Lincoln Handy MIG. I'm using flux core wire. And once we get this welded, we'll grind it down, and then we'll go in and fill in any areas that we missed, and then we'll get it ready for some body filler. Now I've got the patch all welded in, and so what I want to do is I want to tap down any high areas on my welds so I don't run into a problem where I lay filler on it, block it down, and hit bare metal. I want there to be enough room to lay some filler in there so I can block it straight. This is the fiberglass filler we're going to use today, the Fantastic Glass. It's real easy to work with, and we just want to get one good coat on here and fill in all those cracks and crevices from our welds. Now the fiberglass is dry, and we're going to use some 80 grit sandpaper on an orbital sander. I'm just going to start shaping this fiberglass filler, machine sand it down, and then we're going to lay another coat of body filler over top of it, and that's what we're going to use to block this straight. Now I've mixed up some filler. I've got some Roberlo Maxi Fill. We're going to use that over top of this fiberglass filler. We've prepped everything out with 80, so even past the fiberglass, we've got the paint sanded with 80 grit sandpaper, and that's going to help that body filler adhere properly. I want to be careful about how far I get this body filler back behind that bedside because I won't be able to sand way back there. So luckily the rust did not go very far back on this cab corner, and I can lay a thin coat over this entire repair and then we'll block it out. Now I'm going to start shaping this body filler with some 80 grit sandpaper on the. This is a pretty firm block, has a little bit of flex to it, but we'll switch over to a real flexible block when we get closer to primer. I'll use my body line tool just to give me an idea of where that vertical body line is going to be on this cab corner, and that'll help me to shape it and start forming that body line. I've mixed up a little bit of polyester glazing putty, and we're going to put one thin coat on this. This is going to help me block sand this flat and then remove any scratches or imperfections that we might have. And I think the product I'm using here is a fantastic glaze. And I purchased these products at O'Reilly's. And I'll use a little bit of 220 grit sandpaper on this small block to finish blocking this glaze. And then we'll be pretty much ready for some primer. You want your scratches to be anywhere from 180 to 320 before you prime. Now I'm just going to wash it with some wax and grease remover, remove any contaminants, and we pretty much have it taped off now for primer. I just have to tape off that jam so we don't get any overspray in there in areas that we can't paint, and then we'll be ready to spray some primer. The primer we're going to use today is the Roberlo ME1. This is a 2K urethane primer, hardens over the repair surface. We're going to put 2 coats on. We're going to put one on, let it flash off 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll apply another coat. The gun I'm using to spray the primer is the 3M Performance gun. If you haven't checked out the review and demo on that, check it out. I'll leave a link at the end. If you enjoy this content and find it helpful and want to help support the channel, all you have to do is like this video and comment down below. And check out my links down in the description for all the tools and products you need for your project. In the next episode, we're going to prepare and paint this cab corner. But if you don't want to wait, check out one of these videos now that are going to show you exactly how to paint. I appreciate each and every one of you watching, and we'll see you next time on Garage Noise.